Hi, this is Sally Morgan, physical therapist, craniosacral therapist, and Tellington T-Touch practitioner for animals and people. And this is Tristan. He's a Corgi. And we are here for episode 121 of Conversations with a Corgi, where we are continuing our discussion about tuning forks and how they are an integral part of anyone's healing practice. If you are working with animals or humans, I have found them incredibly useful in my work, treating myself as well as benefiting the animals I see by using the tuning forks as part of craniosacral therapy, Reiki, or Tellington T-Touch sessions with the animals I see. And yesterday we talked about tuning forks and how the sound of the tuning fork is part of what their healing properties are, as well as using it almost like a chiropractic tool to stimulate nerves and bones and add motion to the body. Because as I said, anytime you have lack of motion in the body, you are setting up a situation for disease and lack of health. So it's very important to preserve motion in the body at the spinal segments and throughout the body through the fascia, the nervous system, and part of that is moving through scar tissue and breaking up scar tissue to facilitate fluid movement throughout the entire body. Today we're talking about my favorite tuning fork, which is the C128 Hertz Fork. This is from the Biosonics company, who I really appreciate their quality of their products. And this one is called the Universal Healing Fork, and it has a lot of really great properties to it that I really find quite useful. As well as it's a weighted fork. It has these two little weights on the end to sustain the vibrational force for a little bit longer time. So that makes it a little bit more useful than forks that don't have the weights on the end to use on the body. What the C128 Hertz fork does is align the physical structure, and its frequency really resonates with the bones in the body, and it stimulates the nerves and releases tension from the body to create relaxation and peace. And so that's a really important thing to have. I often use it for its sound at the end of a healing session, but particularly with kitties, I use this instead of my activator tool to do joint mobilization or orthopedic veterinary manipulation. So it has many good uses for me. I use it with horses a lot to stimulate nerves to the organs, and certainly with all sizes of dogs, it's quite a useful tool. It can be used directly on the body, as any fork can, but because it's got these weights on the end, it makes it a little more useful to use it directly on the body. And it also is useful to release muscle spasm and pain. And for instance, I get a spasm in this shoulder because the collarbone is broken. So I will strike the fork and just place it on that muscle spasm. And really within seconds to minutes, it really releases the tension in that area. I've used magnets for this as well, but what the tuning fork does that nothing else does is put a gentle vibration, a tiny bit of motion in an area where there's no motion. And that's why I find this particular tool so essential to my healing practice. And as I just showed you on my shoulder, it releases muscle spasm and therefore the pain associated with the muscle spasm, which can be tremendously useful. It can increase circulation when the spasm happens. I lose circulation to that area and the blood flow is decreased, and it can result in a migraine as a result of cutting off the blood to my brain, which is never a good thing. So I have found the C128 fork to be particularly useful for breaking up that muscle spasm and relieving pain, and in fact preventing migraines. I've used it on the back of my head right there where some of the muscles get sore as well because of my particular neck and shoulder problems, and it's tremendously useful. I never go anywhere without it, including airports. It's always been exciting. They're like, oh, are you a conductor? No, I'm a conductor of body health. So I take this fork with me everywhere. It's also been useful to stimulate the nerves and the skin and the hair in particular. And one of the things you can do with it is hold it lightly above the skin and just barely stimulate the hair. And it just gives you, as Linda Tellington says, chicken skin or goosebumps but you can just run it along the hair surface of some of the northern breed dogs and the Persian kitties. They really like this because it feels like this lightest fairy touch down the fur. So it's really useful for hair and skin stimulation. It vibrates at a really low pitch. I don't know if you can hear it. Oh, maybe you can. And that particular tone is very relaxing. And because of the weights, it's able to sustain that tone for a longer period of time. And I find in particular that cats and rabbits really like the sound of that, but so do horses and dogs. It's 128 hertz, and most of the forks from this company come in multiples of 8, because 8 is an octave on the piano or in music. We go from this C to this C to this C in a series of 8. And that series of 8 is an octave because there's 8 notes in that series. And when we get to the chakras, I'll talk about the forks I use for the chakras and more about that 8. But part of the important thing about the 8 is that the pulses in the brain are at also 8 cycles per second. So this is a really good way to stimulate the brain and bring your body into harmony where you've got dysfunction. If you've had a head injury or a stroke, this fork can be really useful, and it sure as heck has helped me. And the pulse of the earth is also in an 8, which is partially why the 8 sounds so pleasing. Whoops. If I could play the piano, that sound of 8, even on my not tuned piano, is very pleasing to us, and we like those kinds of sounds. And part of that is because it is the pulse of the earth, and it resonates with the octave vibrations in our body. You can use this on your ribs. Just put one on the end of Tristan's ribs here. And you can use it on vertebrae. In humans, this is a kind of a lighter fork, so we might use it on the upper vertebrae. But on a dog the size of Tristan, he's got a little malalignment here, so I can put it right on that vertebrae. And you can see he kind of enjoys it. I love the fact that they're getting the physical stimulation also with the sound. I think that really helps an animal. And then one of the most important places I use this is on the ilia, which is part of the pelvis. I don't know if you can see his ilia back here. And it helps bring movement in an area that might be restricted. If your dog has hip dysplasia or had an accident with a car or some other kind of pelvic injury, if you've got a female dog who's delivered lots of puppies, the ilia can be a really important area to use the C128 fork on. And also you can use it on all the lower vertebrae and the sacrum. I usually use the ohm fork on the sacrum for even a small animal, even as small as a rabbit, and we'll be talking about that later. But the C128 can also do it, which is one reason I bring it with me everywhere, because I can use it anywhere on the body of any sized animal. It can be used to loosen tight ligaments, particularly around the coccyx and the sacrum, back here at the junction of the sacrum and the coccyx. There are a lot of ligaments there that can get really tight, especially if a dog has low back pain, herniated discs, any kind of problems like that. They can start to walk with a stiff gait and become really restricted back in this area. So this fork is a really good way to loosen up the tension in those ligaments in the back end of your dog. It's also got a really relaxing effect, and it's useful to rebalance the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. And we've talked about that in relationship to Tellington T-Touch. When an animal is hyper and jumping and leaping and can't settle, they are in a hyper-aroused sympathetic nervous system, which means they're in that stress response, the fight-flight, as opposed to the parasympathetic, which is when your animal is in the rest-digest phase of his nervous system. And you need to be able to modulate between these two smoothly throughout the day so that, you know, your parasympathetic system is in place when you're sleeping, and your sympathetic nervous system is in place when a new dog comes into the house or when you're about to have dinner, or if your person is playing laser tag with you and you're a little kitty. So it's important to have the ability to go up and down through the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. However, due to our culture, many people are just in that stress response all the time. Both the sound of the fork and the feeling of the C128 fork can help rebalance that system so that you are not in fight, flight, or rest, digest, but in a nice, smooth, even mix of the two. And that's one of the properties of this fork that I find particularly useful with animals. And again, if I get to a farm and a horse is very nervous and jumpy and not used to having people working with him, I'll just let him listen to this fork and it will help calm him right down. So the smaller size of this thing they call an auto tuner, which is 32 Hertz, is especially good for the skin and the hair and the nerves. But as I said, this fork is also fine to use for that. It's just at a higher frequency, but it's still in an interval of 8. And I have to say, it's not that effective at unshedding my very shedding Corgi, but it's very nice at making him feel relaxed. And remember, the skin and the hair in particular are extensions of the central nervous system. They develop from the same tissue in utero. And so being able to work with the hair of an animal, we do hair slides in Tellington T-Touch, but you can also use the tuning fork, the C128 fork, on the hair, and that accesses the entire central nervous system and does help an animal relax. If I had a horse that was about to go in and do a jumping course, I would use this on his tail hairs in particular, or his mane hairs, because it kind of stimulates you and relaxes you at the same time. And of course, there's other things we would do with T-Touch work, such as tapping the hooves to make sure he has a clean round. So the benefits of this fork include relaxation, relaxing the body tissue if you have a tight muscle spasm like I often get on my shoulder. It relieves muscle tension, strains and pain and spasms. If you have a Charlie horse in the middle of the night and your calf is killing you, this is a great fork to use to bring some movement into that tight spasming muscle and relieve it. I've had it stop it dead if I'm getting a Charlie horse, as well as taking more magnesium. It's also really effective for pain, and I often use it in the area of old scar tissue and in an area where there may have been a surgery not terribly recently, maybe 12 weeks out. I would use this in the, maybe an inch away from a surgical site. It can be really useful for that. It improves blood circulation to an area. So any kind of an injury or a wound, you want to increase circulation to that area. So for instance, if Tristan had a wound on his little front knee here, as opposed to his true knee back here, I would use this on his shoulder and upwards in his upper arm here to try to increase the circulation going down to that paw and that knee. And certainly for any kind of a pulled toenail or a dew hog getting caught, this would be a good thing to use to help bring healing to that area. And as I've said yesterday, for laminitis and hoof abscesses, I've used the Ulm fork and this fork to increase circulation in the hoof and to get movement in the hoof of horses, and it really works great for both of those conditions. It's also good to stimulate the nerves and in the tissues in the skin and the hair. And I have a cat right now that I'm working with who has bald spots around her body. I see this a bit in cats, and in her case, it's from an autoimmune disease that she has related to a terrible flea infestation when she was a wild kitty. And she's been a person's beloved pet now for a couple of years, but she still has some bald spots where the hair isn't really growing in. And for that, I would recommend a cold laser, but I don't have one. So this can also be really useful to stimulate growth of hair in an area where your animal doesn't have good hair regrowth. I've had horses with old injuries where they just don't have hair, and I have been able to use this fork to help stimulate regrowth of hair in that scarred area, and also bring circulation to often what we have underneath of that is scar tissue in the fascia. So this fork is really helpful in a lot of ways. And it's really effective to use it over a nerve plexus. So we talked about the 8th chakra in dogs, which we also call the brachial plexus chakra, and it's above the shoulder here. And I'm going to just apply this fork here on Tristan's brachial plexus. So we are now getting to many of the nerves that go all the way down to the foreleg and up towards the head and neck. And so it can be really useful for a dog who maybe has an injury or post-surgical in the hind end, has been weight bearing too much on the front end. This can help really bring some circulation and relief to those tight muscles up in the shoulders. For dogs that do agility or a lot of jumping and running for flyball or frisbee or other dog sports, it's a really great thing to be able to use this fork to relax the shoulder muscles after a tough competition, or even indeed in the middle of the competition. So you can use it on the brachial plexus nerves up here, and then down in the sacral coccyx junction we have the ganglia impar, which is an area of the body where we have another big nerve plexus. And if we apply the fork in this area, you can bring deep relaxation to the pet's body as well as increasing circulation to the entire hind end. And this is partially what I mentioned yesterday, helped my dogs with DM. This seemed to really bring them relief. And so it's not, DM isn't like, oh, suddenly you use everything that's connected to the spinal segment of like S1. It's gradual and it's erratic. So I find that using the tuning fork can really, whatever is left working in that area, especially down here on the ganglia impar, can really help a dog with DM, sustain whatever they've got for as long as possible. But again, I have no scientific evidence other than my test on my 2 corgis, and it really helped them. So you can use it on these nerve plexuses. You can also use it on nerve roots. For instance, in a horse that has some issues with their digestive tract, I can use it up here along the spine where the nerves exit the spine to stimulate specific organs related to the nerve roots. And I have had really good luck with this, with cats with digestive problems, animals that even have had a bit of impaction or hairball caught in their digestive tract. This has been really useful to get stuff moving by using it on the nerve root that goes to the particular organ I'm trying to stimulate. For animals with kidney and liver dysfunction, sometimes just stimulating the nerve to those organs can kind of trick them back into higher function than what we are seeing. So it's really profound, the amount of healing properties that a tuning fork can have. And when I've used this on my sister's ankle, she has a chronic issue with an ankle from tripping through a water bucket years ago. Maybe it's better now, but she said to her it felt the same way on the inside of her ankle as the cold laser made her feel when she used it on her ankle. And I don't know that I would say that because I'm more sensitive to the vibrations going through my body, but it is a similar kind of increased circulation coming to the area of an injury that you feel with this tuning fork in particular. So I really also like to use it, for instance, on the sternum. If I have a dog, usually it's a dog, so sometimes it's a cat, that have some heart problems, some cardiac arrhythmias, things like that, I can use this right on the sternum, and it really stimulates the heart and helps bring it back into a nicely functioning rhythm. I've used it on humans for this as well. And some of my old guys, when they were getting too exhausted from some of the exercises we were doing, I've been able to just tap this and put it on their sternum, and it brings them back into relaxation so that they go back into a normal heart rate. Of course, it's not a substitute for emergency medicine and, all of that. I've used acupuncture points on ears for people, and that's also been really helpful. And I've also used T-touch with people to keep them from coding. So the tuning fork is just another piece of that. You can use 2 or more C128 forks, and I only have 1 here, but you can use it near the ears so that the pet can hear the vibration, or the horse or the person, and it is very relaxing. So you can use it this way for sound. Tristan just took a deep breath. I don't know if you could see that. Or you can literally use it on the body, on any nerve segment that you'd like to stimulate to an organ, or any area of the body where you have disease or dysfunction or lack of motion. And again, you can use it on those important plexes of nerve roots in the shoulders and in the hips. And there's several throughout the body. Also up here, I use it often. Sometimes doing a chiropractic or joint mobilization up at the C1 area, C2, is a little bit too hard on some of these small animals. So I'll use this to bring motion to a joint there. Tristan's like, oh, I don't know. And I think the sound of it is also really helpful. For animals that are really sensitive to the sound of my activator tool, I'll use this instead, and I have really good results. So this is an important tuning fork, and it is resonating with a proportion called the golden mean, because it's eighths, more than 8 eighths, but it's in an octave. So anyway, at the 128 hertz, it's a frequency that is called the golden mean, and it is super relaxing, and it sounds really like a low hum. And you can imagine almost that that's the sound that your body makes when it's at rest. Another little tip about these tuning forks: if you're striking them, you don't want to strike them on something hard like a table or something hard plastic. They recommend a hockey puck. I found the heel of my Doc Marten shoes is the perfect consistency, much like a hockey puck. If I'm in a pinch, I can use a hard rubber, like I have a cover on my activator that's hard rubber. And you can also strike it on the surface of your knee, on your patella. I don't like to do that though. I feel like my knee, it's just too much for it. So I tend to strike it on something external, and nearly always it's the bottom of my shoe. So they also now sell like a little pad that you can carry with you to strike it on to get the maximum sound, because your tuning forks can literally go out of tune if you strike them on something too hard, too many times, or drop them quite a bit or bend them. So it's really important to take good care of them. So that's been a little bit of an overview of the C128 Hertz fork from Biosonics and how I use it in my practice working with pets and horses to bring about healing and better health, and more importantly, mobility in all the tissues of the body, because that really is what our health is: good movement throughout our body. So, Tristan, do you have anything more to say? He's waiting for his treat, which he gets after conversations with a Corgi every morning. So we will be back tomorrow morning at 9:25 for a further look at some of the tuning forks that I use in my healing practice with pets. And today we have a fun day. My niece Gwen and her friend are here for a few hours before they set off to Boston for a concert. And the sun is starting to come out here in New England, which is a rare treat. And we just have a stretch of weather coming up where it's going to be like 77 during the day and 50 at night. Perfect weather to enjoy some time outside with my dog, taking long walks. So that's what we're going to do. So everyone, have a great day. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you become intrigued about the tuning forks and check them out, because they are fairly affordable and they can be an important part of anyone's toolkit for their pet, for health emergencies and for wellness, especially with senior pets. And if you're only getting one fork, this C128 would be my recommendation. I love this fork. So we'll see you again tomorrow. This has been Sally Morgan and Tristan Corgi for another episode of Conversations with a Corgi. And now we have some Corgi music. Hi, Linda, you're just joining us. You're going to have to rewind and play it back because we're already done. But today we talked about the C128 Hertz tuning fork. So everybody check it out, and I will see you again tomorrow. Have a great day.